There is a serious retention problem in the restaurant industry right now. A recent poll I did on LinkedIn showed 60% of restaurants are only retaining their managers for 6 to 12 months. Recognizing the significance of this challenge, I wanted to provide you, the listener, with a valuable resource today aimed at proactively addressing and extending this retention timeframe. The first 90 days of a restaurant manager's transition are a critical window for making strategic decisions, building a strong team, ensuring financial stability, and creating a positive guest experience. Successful management during this period sets the stage for long-term success in our highly competitive industry. Today, Mark Maynard is going to share with us how he's found success in creating 90-day plans for his managers over his 30-plus years in the industry, and tell us about the one common mistake new leaders make in their new role. Stick around. You're going to want to listen to this. Welcome to the No Hesitations podcast, the show where restaurant leaders learn tools, tactics, and habits from the world's greatest operators. I am your host, Kristen Marvin with Solutions by Kristen. I've spent the last 2 decades in the restaurant industry and now partner with restaurant owners to develop their leaders and scale their businesses without wasting time and energy so they can achieve work-life balance and make more money. This podcast is sponsored by Schedulefly. Schedulefly provides a simple, web-based and app-based restaurant employee scheduling software backed by legendary customer service. If you are using pen, paper, Excel, or fancy scheduling software with tons of bells and whistles that you don't use, Schedulefly is perfect for your business. When I was a regional manager handling 7 locations, Schedulefly was our go-to for scheduling. It's hands down the easiest platform that I've ever worked with. And their employee scheduling tool is awesome for shooting out mass messages about crucial restaurant updates. Visit schedulefly.com and mention the No Hesitations podcast to learn more and get 10% off. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for being here today. How are you?
Hi, Kristen. It's great to be here. Really happy to be here.
Absolutely. I am, we were able to connect, gosh, maybe it's been a month ago now or close to
even
that,
a little bit longer. Yeah.
on LinkedIn, and loved hearing your story. I'm obviously a big fan of what you do and your former company, and am so excited to share your story today. And you and I are on a similar journey, right? With both being entrepreneurs now. So we're building a little support system, which is incredible and much needed, as you know, in this world. So
we're recovering hospitality industry professionals.
Yeah. Totally. Absolutely. And, I love you reached out and when we decided to do the show and said, here's a list of topics we can talk about. And the one that really stuck out was this concept of 90-day transitional plans. And it's something I'm super passionate about, and just really excited to take a deep dive today and learn about your experience with them and what's made them successful, and talk about some common pitfalls that you've seen in your career too with transitional plans. Because I know I've fallen on my face before.
Right. Yeah. Well, we all have, right? So
right.
That's the purpose is have people not make the same mistakes that we made.
Exactly right. I love it. Would you kick us off today by sharing a little bit about your hospitality background and then what you're up to today?
Sure. I guess I'll do a reverse. So right now I'm a consultant based in New York City. And I work with anyone in the service sector. So I have stores, restaurants. I actually have a museum as a client.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things I say my job is to narrow the gap between the company's dreams or the founder's dreams and their ability to actually execute on it. So what that typically means is me sort of understanding what the purpose is of that business or the founder, and then helping to create systems and processes to make that happen.
Beautiful. Making my heart sing.
Sounds easy.
Yeah. Depending on how large that gap is, right?
Right. Exactly. And it can be large. And self-awareness is a big thing that we talk about early on. And my foundation was 30 years at Danny Meyer's Union Square Hospitality Group, where I started as a host having no interest in the restaurant industry, and ended up as a managing partner in a few of our businesses. And so I left in 2022. So you can do the math, count back 30 years. Um, and that was really an incredible journey.
Mark, was that 30 years with that group? Was that where you spent the majority of your time in hospitality, or was there something before that?
Yeah, well, actually, a good question. My mother was a chef. So I grew up working in restaurants like so many people. I just never saw it as a career. Yeah. I had zero interest. My father was a dentist and my mother was a chef. And there were two things they told me: don't ever go into dentistry or restaurants. So, oh well. So I landed at Union Square Cafe initially in 1992, only because I was working for an architect. I studied landscape architecture at Cornell, who has a good hospitality program, but I wasn't part of it. And I came to New York City after a couple of years of travel after graduation, which is pretty amazing. And I came to New York to work for an architect. And I was working in Chelsea, which is a neighborhood of New York City. And I was only working, I think, like 25 hours a week. And so, like I had done in college and in high school, I needed a little extra cash. And so I applied for restaurant jobs. Actually, that's not true. I applied for one restaurant job. That was the host at Union Square Cafe. At the time, Union Square wasn't really famous. It was a very good neighborhood restaurant. And this young guy, Danny Meyer, was, turning heads a little bit, but it was still just a really good neighborhood restaurant. And I applied as a host, took the job. And for 2 years, I did both hosting and landscape architecture. And I think that's kind of what we're going to talk about today a little bit, is how my experience there forced a decision that I wasn't intending to make, where I said, I'm actually going to drop my intended career and start this new one.
Yeah, I love that. And when you and I connected, I threw out a name, Michael, that I had worked with at the Broadmoor, and you'd said you were able to work with him too for a short time, which was just so fun. And this world is so small. Yeah,
Michael Sesnick was my boss, and when he left, I got his job. So thank you, Michael. So I appreciate that.
I was not that lucky. I was really gunning for his job.
Yeah, right.
I was 25 and thought I knew a lot more than I knew. So anyway, good lessons. Would you talk a little bit about the moment that you knew you were ready for change? Because being with a company for 30 years is just incredible. And I think really unheard of in this business. What was that moment for you where you said, okay, I'm ready to go out on my own?
So I've never been a huge risk taker, or I didn't think I was. It turns out I am. And many of my friends kind of reminded me, Mark, you've done some kind of crazy things in your life that you didn't think were high risk, but they were. But like so many people, the pandemic was just exhausting. And the company was changing, the world was changing, the industry was changing, and I was fried. And so it was time to go, and I think that's, I don't think I was getting the joy out of it that I, wanted to. And in my sort of soul searching, it had less to do with Union Square Hospitality Group and more to do with just doing the same, or, doing pretty much the same thing for a long time. And I needed a fresh start. And so I really took like 9 months off and really reflected and traveled a lot and rode my bike a lot and, spent time with my family, all different parts of my family, which was, something I hadn't done in many, many years as a restaurant leader. And then it became very clear that I needed to sort of take what I had learned and share that with other people.
Yeah, I did something similar when I left the industry from the operational side. I knew I wanted to do something different. I knew I wanted to stay connected with the industry because I loved it so much, but I was also fried and took when we moved and took 3 months off. And I think it really took me a full 3 months of same thing, like hiking, being outdoors every day,
Yep.
just calming down and slowing down for my brain to start build enough capacity to go, okay, I feel like I'm ready to open a restaurant again or something, right? Or create a business right now.
And
so
you've
it takes
kind of made
time.
you've made that one of your, central themes, which I, on LinkedIn and in your consulting. And I think that's helpful because there's a lot of people going through what you've gone through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
for sure. Let's talk about transition a little bit. How did you, again, being with the same company for 30 years, right? You experienced a lot, you took a lot of risks.
Right.
How did you prepare, in addition to kind of taking this break and reconnecting with family and getting back to health and things like that? How did you prepare for your transition into creating your own business?
Wow. That's a good question. So, one of the things that when you are in the position of giving advice or leading people is that you have to remember that it also applies to you.
Yeah. We're the best at teaching what we need to learn, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I, first of all, just really being able to just press pause was somewhat unnatural for me. And just giving myself space and time to think, was really helpful. But what I did is I started calling people who had done something similar. My brother has been a consultant for, I don't know, 20 years. So I talked to him a lot. A good friend of mine from Union Square Hospitality Group, Susan Salgado, she and I worked together for 16 or 17 years. She had gone out on her own like 5 years before I did. And she was like one of the best mentors you could ever have. And other people, just where I really just asked, what's it like? And, I'd been collecting a salary for 30 years, so this was the first time since I was 24 years old that I wasn't collecting a salary.
Same for me. Yeah. I was 24 when I got into management. Yeah.
And so that was pretty intense. And I think, so what I learned is that, a few rules. One of my mantras for myself and one of those advice things is do the work. And so for me, what do the work means is understand what your motivation is, understand what you aren't good at, understand what you are good at and how you can improve at it. And so like an example is something like, I'm good at math, but I'd never had to do accounting. I've always been surrounded by smart accountants, right?
Yeah.
So I think every QuickBooks webinar you could think of, and I know that sounds kind of goofy, but I was going to do it. I'm a single, person business. I don't want to have to hire an accountant at this stage. You know what I mean? One day when I have a firm, I'd love to
Sure.
But that was an example of something where I wouldn't trust myself opening a business until I really could understand how the money worked. I was always great at generating revenue, reviewing P&Ls, working with the marketing team, but I'd never had to do 100% of all the formulas and everything to figure out how it worked. So I did a lot of stuff like that, branding. I worked with a great branding firm. I didn't really have to do human resources because I'm the only human resource here. And then a whole lot of breaking out of my comfort zone, which is reaching out to people, which is something that when you work for a famous company, everyone comes to you.
Yeah.
And so I can't believe how much tea I drank, how many glasses of wine I had, how many breakfasts or lunches I had with people, that I was kind of peripherally involved with over the last, couple of decades. And just listening, my God, I mean, just listened to so many stories. It was great.
Isn't it magical what happens when you start putting out there to your existing network and even to new people what your intentions are and what your goals are and what your vision is? Isn't it amazing the information that floods and the support? I think in the beginning, I thought, man, everybody's going to be so guarded. They're not going to want to share their success with me and it has been the complete opposite. I've had probably 500 over 500 conversations, and 499 of them have been absolutely magical. And I take something away. I may not, I may not take that, apply that lesson right away, but I know 5, 10, 15 years down the road, I'm going to be looking back at that conversation and being really happy that I had it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. I use the word purpose a lot. Like how we need to be intentional with what our purpose is. And I actually have a little whiteboard right in front of me here. And my company, which is me, I have a purpose. And the purpose is to empower people to exceed their potential. And which isn't necessarily supposed to make sense. But why I said that is a way for me to remember that I'm always here to serve other people, whether they're paying clients or people who, I do a lot of work with Cornell and NYU and Columbia Business School. And so if I can help them reach their potential, even if they're, 21-year-old students or whether they're, 50-year-old billionaires, I'm happy to help anyone.
I love it.
And I just always try to remind myself of that. And I think about how many people did that for me.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Let's dive into this idea of the 90-day transition plan for leaders. What is important to you about this topic? Why do you want to talk about it today?
So I wanted to talk about it because I think it's something that a lot of people just believe happens. That someone gets promoted or someone gets hired from the outside, and it could be they're a server or it could be they're a new manager. Like, it doesn't really matter. Or it could be, a even more senior role. And without intentionality, there are so many opportunities to screw it up. And so it's something that we as leaders and as organizations need to document and to the real minute details, so it feels natural to the person on the receiving end. And I'll just give you a tiny little example, which is probably not even necessarily what you were thinking of. When we held interviews at Union Square Hospitality Group, if I came in, assuming they were in person, so if someone came in to interview and they said, "Hi, I'm here to meet with Mark," for an interview, it wasn't just nice if the bartender said, "May I offer you a glass of water?" It was written into a sequence of service that we had for our hiring process.
I love that.
Because we wanted to make sure that from the very first interaction that person had with a member of our team, they were offered something for them. And that's an example of something you can't just rely on someone's good nature or chance.
Yeah.
So I always and so if I saw, when I greeted someone, or, when I came and we went down to a table and I interviewed them, if they didn't have a glass of something in front of them, I would say, "By the way, may I get you a glass of water?" And I was actually testing the system.
Yeah.
And that was my way to make sure the feedback loop was working. They said, "Oh, no, the bartender was so nice. She already offered me something."
That's so funny. I also, I didn't build a system in for that. I absolutely love that. But it reminded me, whenever somebody would come in to interview, I would always let the host know, or whoever, the front door team know, "Hey, there's an interview coming," so that they weren't surprised. But then I'd also say, "I want to know what your interaction's like with this person."
Yeah, I love that.
Was this person kind to you? Right? Because they're strangers, right? And then, so I'd always get that feedback from them, which I loved.
Right. Because they're going to be nice to you.
Right.
But are they going to be nice to the host? Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, or the porter or whatever. Yeah. That's awesome. The interviewing process and the sourcing process and all of that, it starts long before they've ever interacted with your, with your organization. And I think, so yes, it's 90 days post hire, but it's really, how long is it before that? How are you handling, calling people back if they are, if they applied online, do you have a process for declining or accepting their application? And these are the things that are seemingly boring or, maybe like real minutia. But these are the things. I'm actually working with a client right now where we're going through their flow, and they're realizing that there's like a 5 or 6 day lag period between the time a person submits their application online and the time that person gets any sort of response.
Yep. It's too long.
I mean, they may as well just be like never,
Yeah.
because this is someone who's looking for a job. They're maybe a high school or a college student. They've got rent due in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And they're going to go with whoever gets back to them first.
Yeah. I've done some writing on this because it really, like when I first started my company, it was really pissing me off because I was working with clients through career transition. And I had a couple people come to me and say, I have applied for 100 jobs and I've only heard back from one person. And I just was so infuriated because I really wanted those companies to understand it's just what the interviewee experience is like, and put as much emphasis into that as they do their guest experience. And I think what they're losing sight of is that even though you don't hire somebody, that person, you can turn them into a guest. Right? They're applying for your company for a reason. So I love that you focused on that part of the transition.
It's interesting. One of my clients is they're a restaurant group based in Scotland called Buzzworks, and they actually have that said where they actually say, we don't think of them as applicants, we think of them as future guests.
Love that.
Which I think is great, because they understand that they're only going to be hiring, maybe 25% of the people who apply. So that means that's 75% of those people are future guests.
Totally. So once you get through the interview process, what does that transition period look like?
Right. Then? So I think this is where again, I'll you just keep using the word intentional. So I'll try to edit myself, but clearly communicating what to expect at every step of the process is really important. And that goes with the applicant or, the candidate in this case, and the team. And so, who is greeting the person on their first trail? If it's a trailing sort of situation where they're coming in and they might be having 3 days of training before they're officially, in the tip pool or that kind of thing. Is the manager greeting them? At a bunch of the businesses that I was responsible for, it had to be the manager to at least say hello to them. Maybe, obviously the manager can't be standing at the door like a stalker, but it was always the sort of thing where the manager made an impression early on, like in the first few minutes. And then, who are you selecting to be their trainer for the day? You can't just wing that, and you want to make sure there's a cultural fit in addition to a technical fit. You want to make sure this person knows what they're doing, but also that they believe in what you're doing. I've seen it happen, and it's, we're just like, oh, can you just trail with Jane? She's worked here for a week, but she's going to be fine. So bad.
It is bad. It is bad. I love that we're getting like really, really, really nitty gritty on this. And I'm just like amazed. And I wish I would have been able to incorporate all these little touches into my plans. But I want to take a step back for a second and go a little bit bigger picture, because you just said something that really reminded me. Let's go back to why 90 days and what's the purpose of a 90-day plan?
So there are two, I think there's multiple purposes. First of all, in the first few weeks, it's just mayhem. You don't know what you're doing, and you're like a transplant, where you may not get accepted, and so there's the first few weeks, which is, just, okay, try to see if this person can show up to work on time. In New York City, the subway system, a lot of people are traveling for an hour on several different train lines to get here, so they need to test out their commute, things like that. I'm sure that happens, if you're in Atlanta, right? The worst traffic, or LA, if you're taking, you have to make sure, is this a 30-minute commute or a 45-minute commute? So things like that, the first few weeks are kind of tough. that also tends to be sort of like maybe 75% training, 25% real work. And then kind of the next month is more like 75% real work, 25% training. Um, and I think really once you get to day 60, you know whether that person is going to be working out. And so for me, that third month is when you really invest a lot of extra time in their sort of the X factor things, that those, 201 or 301 level classes that they can sort of say, okay, I know how to do the basics of my job. I can describe everything, or I can cook everything, or I've learned if I'm a manager, right? I've learned those basic processes. I've cut my closing time down by, 25%.
Yeah.
And then that third month is when you're really diving deep into the culture and the meaning of your work. And to me, that's the time where you as a leader still have the opportunity to make an impact on this person's direction and on their potential. And I think that's when they decide when they want to stay as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I would create a 30, 60, 90-day plan for our managers, whether they were internal or external, right? Because you're going through a transition, whether you're a brand new employee or someone being promoted, right? From within, the first 30 days were all about just being a sponge and just learning the culture, right? And working side by side with the team and just soaking up as much knowledge as you can. And when I've gone through some transitions, and started creating these plans, I read The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins.
I've read it 4 times. No exaggeration. Yeah.
And I love that he talks about not expecting somebody new to create value to your company until at least 90 days.
Yep.
I love that. And you had mentioned that once they get towards the end, then they can really start, applying that knowledge and jumping in and then showing that they're hungry and that they want to grow and learn and start making a positive impact on the company. Yeah. Hey there, listeners. Before we jump back into today's episode, let's shine a light on a pressing issue in the restaurant industry: employee retention. If you're grappling with the challenges of keeping a solid team together, you're not alone. I would like to extend an invitation for a quick 15-minute discovery call to discuss your specific situation and explore strategies to boost restaurant retention. Your team is the heart of your business, and retaining great talent is crucial for your mental and physical health, as well as the health of your business. Visit my website at kristenmarvin.com/contact to schedule your call. Let's collaborate to enhance your retention strategies and create an environment where your team thrives. Now back to the show. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm eager to connect with you soon.
And one of the things that our job as leaders is to tell people that it's okay for them to not make that impact. I used to, jokingly say, people say, what does success look like for me? I'm like, if you can show up for your first 20 shifts, I'll be impressed, because, going back to some of those other variables, and they'd be like, oh, really? I'm like, no, well, you're still going to get quizzed. You're still going to do this, but just learn it. You're going to feel like you're in everyone's way, and you will be in everyone's way, but they were there a year ago or 5 years ago. And if we are doing a good job, we're going to make you feel comfortable and at least welcome, and we should be teaching you as well. And one of my favorite things in that, actually, I think it's in that book, where it's Early Wins, where he talks about we need to give ourselves opportunities for little victories where a task isn't so hard, but we can feel good that we just sort of checked something off our list, our to-do list. And so if you put too many sort of high thinking or high level things too early, it's easy to crush people's soul. Because if they've applied for a job with you, or if they've started a new job, you don't know what else is going on in their life. They might have just graduated. They might have just gotten divorced. They might have just had a kid and they need more money. You don't know. And so they're just they're probably juggling or dealing with a whole lot of other change way beyond this new job.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, something that Michael talks about in the book, right, is they're not just transitioning into a new role. They're
Right.
transitioning every part of their life, right? And
Right.
when I worked at Snooze, this was really eye-opening for me because people entering the brunch world for the first time, and I struggled with this, like getting
Oof.
up at 4:30 or
Yeah.
3:30 or 4:30, right, in the morning and trying to be on was really, really difficult.
Yeah.
And so we would constantly check in with people, especially if they were late, right? You'd give somebody
Yeah.
one or two times over the first
Right.
couple of weeks because you understood
Right.
that getting up that early was just a huge adjustment. But just checking in with them on like, how's this fitting in with your home life?
Right.
Because I would come home from Snooze and eat dinner and go to bed at 7 o'clock. And my husband would go, "What's the matter with you?" Right. He's
Right.
staying up till
Right.
10 or 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And those checking in on those transitions are really important
Yep.
for families and home life. How did
Agreed.
you handle that?
A lot of it was on a case by case basis, and I think that's something where I think it's really special if a more senior leader can have that conversation because, um, actually, this is a little something I'll especially early on that I'll kind of go through as a GM or as a managing partner. What I would do is I would check in because at a certain point I stopped really being involved with interviewing, which was literally the last thing that I gave up when I became a director of operations over multiple places. It was really hard for me to give up. But what I did is I relied on the GMs or the managers to tell me how new people were doing. And what I would do is I would say, let's say you were my GM and we had a new server or bartender. I would go up to them and say, "Oh, Kristen tells me you've really aced those recipes. That's great." And they'd be like, "Oh, really? I don't know, that's amazing that you know that." I'm like, "Yeah, because my job is to make you look better as that person's supervisor." But then I would be like, "Hey, you got a minute?" And they'd be like, "Sure." And then I would sit down and I would ask some of those questions that you just asked, like, "So how's it going? How's the commute over here to 11th Avenue? We're like a very hard place to get to. Or is this what you were expecting? How's the pay compared to what you were expecting? How are the hours? And it was just a way for me to get a little sniff test on how they were doing. And again, it was me testing our systems, because a lot of times the new person, they don't get the best schedule, right? And the best, quote unquote, could mean something different to different people.
Yeah.
But as I think more GMs, especially GMs, and directors of operation, they need to do fewer of those boring tasks and more of those tasks because that's what gave me fuel to be able to talk to the new bartender or to talk to the new cook. That sort of filled my tank. And I know it made an impact on them. Oh, wow, this guy who I only see every once in a while came over and he knew about me. And that's so cool. He seems interested in what I'm doing. And I think, and I was, and it's like one of these virtuous cycles where, and then this person then becomes a better employee for the GM or that's the hope anyway.
Yeah, I love that. Would you speak a little bit to how you handled creating a 90-day plan for internal promotes in management?
Yeah, and interestingly, that could be even more difficult because you know what that person is good at, and they're going to always sort of go back to their comfort zone. And so, one thing that I mean, I don't know if it was really any different, except that it could be a little bit more organic. And what I mean by that is to say, if this happens, if you already know the culture and you know how you know a lot of the basics, we could say, we don't need to do this 8 hours a day. We can say, let's just do 2 hours a day of something where, like what we would do if someone was a server who was then becoming a manager, let's just say, we'd say, you can still do your server shift because we haven't found a replacement for you yet, but then we'll figure out a way to make this legal, which of course has to be, where you then close the restaurant with the manager, and you learn the closing procedures. So we would do things like that whenever we could, because there's this time where you realize that there's a demand for this position, you've found someone inside, but you haven't replaced them yet. And it kind of be silly to, it's the old cut off your nose to spite your face. It's like, yeah, well, she wants to be a manager and we've hired her to be a manager, but we have 4 holes in the server schedule. That said, I still think you need a timeline, meaning like you can't be like, oh, this goes on forever, because that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah.
That was a little more technical, sort of culturally and sort of philosophically. One of the biggest things that I do is spend time with those managers, those new managers, and say, what got you here won't get you there.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be the best technician. You might know the most about wine, or you might know the most about food. But now the things that you are judged on for your success are not your wine and food knowledge. They're more about how you lead teams, how you inspire others, how you teach people, how you solve problems, how you, improve the guest experience more globally, not just, I was always the best server, Yeah. And so those are the things that I think, those softer skills that we have to focus on, because otherwise they just believe that they'll just use their knowledge all the time. And that's like, that won't really help the business move forward at all.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? They don't, when you say like, that they have to figure out how to inspire the team and show up, like they don't even know what that means, right? Like they don't know how to lead. And so I've found it's so different, but it's very similar too, right? If you're promoting somebody within their own location, you have to work with them on how do you want to show up differently for this team now, right? Because the entire relationship is going to change. And when they're, I think it's so much easier to promote somebody, within, but at a different location, right? Because they're already walking in with all of that knowledge. They get the culture. They can walk right in immediately and start, managing the bottlenecks and working with the team and answering the questions. And so that confidence is already there, which is so important to their success. But yeah, really, really working with them on figuring out like, what is your leadership style? Let's define it, and a lot of times they don't know. And it's like, look around at who's around you. What do you want to pull from them?
Right. I love, that's one of my favorites is, tell me about a leader you admire, or,
I do that a lot in leadership workshops. I just came back from Denver, and we went around the room and everybody told stories of a leader that had been really impactful in their life. We made a list of all those characteristics. They picked the top 5. And then we went through, what do you need to do to show up to be this leader? And then, what are the action items behind that and the commitments? So that's a really fun exercise.
Yeah.
For sure.
I remember one person who I promoted from one manager up to a more senior manager, and she was really struggling with pre-meal lineups and just rambling on and so we ended up talking about that, and she's like, well, Mark, you're just so natural at it. And I was like, wait, I never even told her that I rehearse, like I realized it, and this is years ago, where I was like, oh my God, I didn't tell her how to do it. I didn't teach her how to do a good lineup, and I'm like, oh, I always go in with 3 points. I want one thing to be like squishy. I always use that term, I wanted a squishy thing. I wanted a technical thing. I wanted a financial thing. And then I always end on a happy thing, and she was like, oh my God, I've been listening to you for a year and I never realized you did that. I'm like, well, what did you think of the line? She's like, they're so good. And I was like, oh, there you go. People don't have to know you have a formula, but having a formula is helpful. And that was like this big aha moment, because she had never had to lead a lineup before.
Yeah, I love that. There was a story I told. I had Michael Sesnick on the show early on, and he was really impactful for me. He was the GM at the Broadmoor when I became an AGM for the first time in my early 20s. And he really developed me and took me under his wing. And I remember he was teaching me how to do lineup. And same thing. He had very specific topics that he would cover. But I remember how just nervous I was. And we were all seated together in the dining room. It was just a very comfortable environment. And our team was amazing. And I had helped open the restaurant. So the bonds that are formed with that, within that time is great. But and he didn't remember the story, but I told him that one of my first lineups, like he would always make me go make him a cappuccino before lineup. I don't know if he did that for you.
No,
And we, so
I
we
would have thrown
sat.
it right back at his face.
I thought at the time he was just helping me perfect my craft, but I think I was just, serving him. And so anyway, I sat down and I started the lineup, and he just leaned right into me and started like screaming like a fanatic at a football game in my ear, like, woo, just humiliating me in front of the
Yeah,
team. And he was like, I don't know why I did that. That sounds so cruel. But I told him thank you, because it really helped me
right,
just not take myself so seriously, have
right.
some fun,
Yep,
So
yep.
anyway,
Yeah,
just the squishy stuff comes into play.
yeah, it does. It does. And the other thing is, right, I mean, with education, but actually, I'm glad we are talking about the first 90 days, but imagine you're a new employee and you now come into this place where they seem to have their act together. Family meal is great, let's say. You then do a great lineup where like people seem to be engaged and inspired. You've been there 10 days or a week, and then, you taste some food or you taste something to drink. And like when you think about how much you can pack into that one 20-minute meeting or whatever it is in each restaurant, 10 minutes sometimes, and then you see that over the course, or you experience that over the course of your first couple of weeks, that's the stuff that hooked me. That's what hooked me. Because I was like, wow, I've tasted 10 different wines in my first 2 weeks. Because that
Yeah.
was the thing at Union Square Cafe. Every day, without fail, we tasted at least one wine at
Yeah.
lineup. And guess what? I then took that on to Blue Smoke, where we tended to do more beer and whiskey. And then Porchlight, many, many years later, where we always did a cocktail or a whiskey a spirit. But what an incredible impression, because I didn't know anything about that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I could organically just learn without having to raise my hand and without having to tell the difference between Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc or whatever. I could just listen to people and be a sponge for as long as until eventually someone was like, okay, it's been a few weeks. We're going to start calling on this new guy,
Yeah.
Um,
It's such a fun way for continued learning and development, though, for restaurants that have been open for a long time that say, I don't know what to teach my team. I feel like a broken record, right? I
right.
guarantee you that there are menu items that some servers and bartenders and managers just steer away from, right? And if you
Right.
can taste, and same thing, like wines, cocktails, beers, whatever it is, right? If you can pick one item a day and you've got a total of 50 or 100 things on your menu,
Right.
they're never going to get old, right?
Yep.
It's going to help re-inspire your team. It's going to give them new ideas, new perspective. It's such a fun way, an easy way, and low cost way to
Right.
develop the team.
Yeah. And, so my thing is, one of my things that I always say is training is marketing, and like the best marketing ever.
Yeah.
To get your team, to your point, to get your team engaged. I mean, think about what we do for a living. We create things that make people happy. Like it's so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, and most of what we do is pretty cool, like it's, whether you think of it as a theater part or the creative, like we're feeding people, that's a very intimate experience.
Yeah.
We're getting people drunk. Maybe we'll, like I'm not, whatever you pick, we're creating this experience that's transformational, whatever you want to call it. You can latch onto a thing and say, wow, I'm a part of that. Like we're bringing people together, that's what, I mean, the word restaurant means to restore. So like, of course we're restoring people,
Yeah.
And so to learn how to do that behind the scenes, it's probably like, working in the backstage of a theater where you're like, oh, that's how they make that person fly. Like that's pretty cool, know?
I love that. Did you craft a 30, 60, 90-day plan that was on paper for all of your managers coming in?
I would say that we did eventually. Yes.
Okay.
Years ago, no, we didn't. But more recently, in the past, like 10 or 15 years, we did.
Yeah, I didn't learn how to do that until I was a regional. And my boss had asked me at the time, what's your 30, 60, 90-day plan for this manager? And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. So I went and figured out what that was about. And if for anybody listening, if you would love a sample of something like that, just come to my website at kristenmarvin.com/contact and let me know that you listen to this episode and you want a an example of a 90-day plan, I'd be more than happy to either create one with you or send you one. But I found that when we presented those to the managers day one and said, here's what the next 90 days is going to look like for you. We're going to check in on this. This is our responsibility, but it's also your responsibility to own this.
Right.
They were like, oh, thank you so much.
Yep.
Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, it really is, because people, if you're hiring the right people, they want to figure out how this new thing fits into their life, kind of like you were talking about the multiple transitions. And some of those things are also aspirational things. So for example, as a director of operations, you might think, oh, they have to take these 3 classes at the home office. I'm just making that up, and that's a burden. But then if you say, well, no, the beauty of this is that they're going to have to go to our regional office, and there's going to be other people who are in the same stage. They're in their week 6 or they're in their week 8. And this manager at restaurant X is going to meet the new sous chef at restaurant Y. And it's a way to create community while you're learning about something that is, maybe legally required, or, is an interesting, the story of your company or something like that. And those opportunities to meet other people who are traveling along a similar path, that's the marketing part of it. Because then that person's like, oh, next time you're in my restaurant, let me know and I'll send you out an appetizer. I don't know, that kind of thing, which makes it really special. And those are the things that keep people there. We talk about employee engagement so much in our industry, but like, that's the way you engage your employees. It's not just about another 50 cents per hour or another $1,000 of salary, which of course is never a bad thing. But it's a way to say, wow, there's a lot of cool people who work at this company too.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting. You just had me question, did you create these transitional plans from day one? It sounds like from day one, or when you were hiring people. I typically started them when people got out of training.
Well, it depended. A manager we would do from what I call day 0, which is paperwork. Day 0 is paperwork. And then, so like day 1 might be, you have to watch, because like in New York State, you have to watch the anti-sexual harassment thing within your first X number of days, so that would be front loaded. And then, but, in week 6, it might be spend the morning in the accounting team office to learn about forecasting. But you don't really want to do that in week 1. You have other things to learn. With line employees, we didn't really have a 36 90-day program. It was more like we would have a check-in, which is because really once they finish their training, they would have the job, and then there might be like monthly training classes that they would have to attend, but everyone would need to attend those. And then after 36 and 90 days, they would meet with the GM or the sous chef just to discuss, kind of a real formal way to be like, hey, how's it working out? What can we do for you? Do you have any questions? And that was really, if you do work at a company that has an human resources department, I think that was always one of the most sort of special relationships that I liked as an operator, is to have the human resources department be sort of actively involved way beyond just taxes and, compensation and things like that.
Absolutely. What's the one biggest mistake that you see new managers coming into a company?
Trying to do too much. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, trying to impress people. And that's why I think it's really important for the leadership, that person's boss, to sort of give them a free pass for the first, few weeks and say, if you do nothing else, build strong relationships. That's all I want you to do.
Yeah, 100%.
Get to know people. What I'm saying without saying it is, don't be a jerk. Don't be a know-it-all.
Right.
I don't care where you used to work. I don't care how many Michelin stars you had or Beard Awards. I don't really care. You're here now. Just build relationships. Learn what we're all about.
Yeah, there's no bigger turnoff than somebody that's not curious about your culture, your people, your systems, or the why behind what you're doing. And I agree. A big part of our 30-day plan was don't come in, especially at a GM level, right, or a regional level. Don't come in and implement anything yet. Let's just discover and just be there.
Right.
So,
But they need A, permission to do that. And B, they need the support, because if they are brand new and the place is on fire, they may have no choice but to act in a way that is, you don't think is right, but they don't have any other way to act because that's all they knew from the last place.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for
Pleasure.
having this conversation. I know we had talked before we jumped on about, the importance of 90-day transitions for opening restaurants. And I would love to have you come back on so we can talk about that all day long as well.
Yeah, openings are a whole other animal, right?
It's critical. Yeah, I've gone
they're
through.
They're more of like a beast.
There's 13. Yeah, I always told my husband I've done 13 openings, and I would always say to him, I need 90 days, babe. Like, got to give me 90 days and then I'll see you.
And then 90 days of recovery after that.
Yeah. and then plan a vacation, please. Yeah, exactly. For sure. Well, let's let people know how they can get a hold of you.
Absolutely. So on LinkedIn, I'm Mark Maynard. And my website is maynardconsulting.net. That's really the best way to get in touch with me.
I love it. And you are just putting out some really awesome leadership content on LinkedIn. So everybody go check that out for sure. I always enjoy that. All right, everybody. Thank you. Appreciate it. Be sure to share this podcast with any leaders you know in the restaurant industry, and follow me on LinkedIn at Kristen-Marvin. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.